Okay, this is far enough, old man. I'm getting tired of walking around in this dead quiet with no idea what the hell we're trying to accomplish.
I concur with my partner. What exactly is the purpose of our meeting here tonight?
Podcasting. Nothing else would have enticed you here.
Welcome back to another episode of Spawnography, Hell Spawn. I am your host, Pierce. I'm here with
George Marston. It's so good to see you again, Pierce. It's our first time recording post-Halloween.
It's true. I knew you had those really voices.
Yeah. Did you channel a little bit of Marilyn Shaw? Have you seen that MST3K episode?
Mm-hmm. It's a great one.
Yeah. I mean, it's a movie, of course, but also the MST3K episode is kind of
punches it up a little bit.
Yeah. Anyway, you went and saw Touche Amore, you said, which pretty cool way to spend Halloween's Eve.
It was pretty cool. My friend Raj, Raj, texted me during the day and was like, "You want to go to this show?" And I was like, And then our mutual friend Joe was like, "Do you want to go to the show? I have a free ticket. We can have VIP." And I was like, "Oh, great." And all VIP means at the Warsaw in Greenpoint is that there's a little gated area on the balcony where you can just watch and be old.
Hell yeah. That rules.
So there's like a little countertop in front of you so you can kind of lean on it. So it was great. They played the hits.
That's awesome.
They played a bunch of new stuff, which is great. Their new record's excellent.
Yeah, I've listened to it. It's quite good.
Soul Glow opened.
That's excellent. Great.
And Portrayal of Guilt.
All right. I haven't heard them, but I'll check it out.
Pretty heavy, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool way to start off the show. Also, because it was Halloween, people were in costumes at the show. So like when a pit opened up and it was like Lala from Teletubbies, like crowd killing a robot, like
sounds good. Like a Death Grips show or something. There's like kids playing Beyblades or something. I want to go see Health, one of my favorite bands, but they're a TikTok band now, which God bless, that leads to success. Sure, whatever. I don't care. I'm also old and I don't want to be around teenagers. But like every image of a Health show I see looks like an anime convention and kids are just in costumes moshing. And I'm just like, I'm too old for that. I'm trying to pay attention to the synths and shit. Like I'm just an old piece of shit.
There are no children in these two issues. Well, I guess Cyan's in one of them.
Yeah,
but
there's there's some children of hell.
To get kind of right into it, not my favorite issues. They are a bit of a new jumping on point. I think we've said that like every episode for like the last 3 episodes or so, because we would be just past, this has September 97 like cover date, which means it maybe came out in October. So the movie's been out. The letters are about the movie.
This is the issue that people are going to be seeing on stands basically when they decide to go to the comic store after seeing Spawn. If those people existed in 1997, that feels like the fabled non-existent demographic for the last 15 years, certainly, of like, they'll see the movies and then they'll go buy the Captain America comic books. And
yeah, remember when it was like a big deal that Marvel put like, go to your local comic book store for more, like in front of like Captain America Civil War or something, and like everybody was like, what? Okay,
I don't want to rant on this because it's not my job and I don't want to do it for free, but I feel like there are a lot of missed opportunities in the commingling of marketing of like comics and comic book movies and like the dying market of the local comic book store. Anyway, all that aside, back in 1997, comic book stores were in their first sundown.
Yeah.
Kind of solidly after the bursting boom of the speculator bubble. Yeah. And so we're talking about Spawn 65 and 66. 65 in particular, and we'll get into the content of the issue in a moment, but it definitely feels like an issue that was, like you said, we've said that jumping on point buzz term, which comic companies again still love. We've said that a couple times over the last few arcs. It feels like they've been circling the bullseye on that. Like they've been trying to nail it down, and this feels like maybe their most concentrated attempt to just be like, this is just an issue for people who want to get a load of what's going on. It is the comic book equivalent of a sitcom clip show that airs right before the big season finale because people are hearing the buzz about that and they want to tune in and get caught up on what they've missed if they haven't been watching. It feels like that. It also feels a little bit, and we were saying this before we started recording, it feels a little bit like Todd's attempt to maybe streamline some of the mythology that's been a little bit fluid, some of the motives and reasonings and causes and causations behind events of the last 64 issues. Seems like this is maybe his attempt to not retcon, but like hone that edge a little.
Yeah, I think that having like being 60 plus issues in at this point, 60, right?
Yeah.
Crazy. Being like 60 plus issues in at this point, you probably could go to the comic book store and pick up most of the previous 60 issues, but not necessarily easily. The compendiums don't exist. Trades are becoming more of a thing, but they are still fewer and farther between than they are today. Today, it's a pretty constant machine of 6 issues come out. A couple months later, you're going to get the trade of all 6 issues, whatever.
That's
so it's
a
easy to
market of
catch
its
up.
own. Back
Right.
in the 90s, especially at this point, you had stuff like the Death and Return of Superman that was getting collected.
Sandman.
But Sandman trades, maybe this was kind of around the point where that market was starting to get tapped a little bit from like the big companies. You were starting to see more Marvel and DC collections. But for a long time through the 90s, those were kind of more like special occasion things.
Yeah, definitely not as common. And so this really, I mean, even the title of the first issue we're covering today is just called The Past, and it really is just this reflection on what Spawn is, what it's become. And it is, I think, Todd answering the question, what is Spawn? And like to somebody who maybe doesn't understand or doesn't know it. Let me do the credits real quick, and then we can kind of get into the issue itself.
This is a perfect time to get into that.
So, Spawn number 65, Todd McFarlane, Image Comics presents The Past, dedicated to Chris Albrecht, he was the former CEO and president of HBO. So at this time, again, animated series, doing gangbusters. So Todd's happy about that. Story by Todd McFarlane, pencils by Greg Capullo, inks by Todd McFarlane and Chance Wolfe, copy editor and lettering by Tom Warzikowski, colors by Brian Haberlin and Dan Kemp, cover and design by Brent Ash. And we have a little summary, a little previously on. It says, by morphing his symbiotic suit to match the soldiers, Spawn infiltrates the compound where Jason Wynn has reinforced security. He successfully severs communication and power systems to cripple the battalions, leaving a terrified Wynn trapped in silent darkness. Spawn surprises Wynn and threatens him with a promise to undermine his international operations until nothing remains of his empire. Meanwhile, in the alley, Sam and Twitch try unsuccessfully to get information from the inhabitants there about Spawn. Eventually, Cagliostro fills them in on facts that only lead, as always, to more questions.
Questions and files and questions and files.
There are lots of consistencies in Spawn, and one of them is that there are always questions.
Yes.
And that there frequently are not answers. But this issue tries to be an answer because we've talked about it a lot to this point, is that like we've tried to sort of figure out, like, can we figure out things about Todd McFarlane from his work on Spawn? Can we figure out things about how he views good and evil, his views on like morality, since he's using the dressing of heaven and hell and kind of religious imagery in a way? Does that say anything about who he is as an artist?
Right.
And it's kind of funny because this lands firmly in the no, you can't learn anything about the man himself from any of this.
I mean, you can learn some things about him as an artist and as a creator. And you can learn some things about Spawn as a comic book from this issue, I think. Now, I will say, speaking of questions and answers, right off the bat on this first page, some questions that we've long had and asked back and forth as over several episodes, time and again on this podcast, are answered here in their own kind of interesting way. There's a lot of no prizing going on in this issue and on this first page. Now, this first page sets the stage for exactly what this issue is. This is a very pulled back, kind of very Mignola-esque splash of Sam and Twitch and Cagliostro walking into Rat City. Most of the page is black. We see just the edges of the building that exist outside of the shadows kind of eking their way into the depths of darkness as Cagliostro leads Sam and Twitch, who met last issue in the last arc, into Rat City. Now, off the bat, this is first off kind of the format of the whole issue is these big splash pages with big areas of black that are filled in with just big blocks of text. This block of text addresses a lot about what Rat City is and where it lies. And there are some interesting things here. Now, in the beginning and over time, there has been occasional reference to Rat City being in, quote, the Bowery, which is in place in New York City. That's a neighborhood.
Yeah, it's an actual. There's only one though.
That's what I was going to say. Now, there's a neighborhood in New York City called the Bowery. Now, right. At the same time, Rat City has also geographically been placed in locations that don't make sense with where the Bowery is in New York.
And also, we have had questions about where like Terry and Wanda live in reference to the Bowery.
In relation to this,
the Bowery would be closer to Brooklyn, not really Queens. Queens is more uptown where it connects to Manhattan. So this is all like been a little odd and awkward.
And so what this page endeavors with it to do with its first couple paragraphs is establish that, well, he didn't mean the Bowery. It's a Bowery in the sense that Bowery as a term means a lower income or a neighborhood in less repair or a place of like clogged, urban, what's the word I'm looking for? Of close urban development,
Yeah.
And so this is basically like, well, we didn't mean the Bowery. We just meant the Bowery of where they are. And now, again, as you so quickly pointed out and so correctly pointed out, if I were to say in New York, in any neighborhood of New York City, any borough, I'd wager to say, I'm going to the Bowery.
You know,
people
exactly
would
where
think I was going to the neighborhood known as the Bowery.
Right. This is the first bit of like Todd twisting himself in knots to make the things that he's written make sense. And there's one idea here that I do kind of like, especially as New York at this time in 1997, when this comes out, would be in sort of this, like, it's sort of the Disneyfication era of New York City where it kind of becomes a little bit cleaner and, whatnot. It's not the scary New York City of the 70s and 80s.
Times Square is more known for tickets and Toys R Us than like porn stores and needle freaks and stuff.
Exactly. And so I like the idea, though, that Todd's basically saying, like, where there are highs, there are also lows.
Yeah, he's kind of talking about that process of like gentrification where when the wealthy move out of the more condensed areas and more dense areas into the areas that were once undesirable, those areas get lifted up. The areas they leave behind kind of fall into disrepair. And then there are the areas where the people who were living in the places that were once less desirable are now forced to go, which are even less desirable. Right. And that's kind of what it's saying Rat City is it's the maze of destitute buildings that kind of constitutes this last ditch, last hope of humanity where people live when they have nowhere else to go.
It's the alley within the alley within the alley.
Yes.
Within the depths of the end of the world.
Very much like we see in the Spawn movie when he goes to Rat City, and it's really more of a like, it's kind of its own little world.
Yeah.
Like that movie came out a few years before Gangs of New York, but Gangs of New York very famous for its portrayal of like, of course the 5 points borough, the 5 boroughs of New York and all whatever, these neighborhoods and these areas of like downtrodden, very dense urban, like urban, what's the word I'm looking, I keep looking for the same word but I haven't found it yet. um just dense population, very high populated areas, where like in that movie they go into the buildings and there's like people living in the walls of these condemned buildings, basically almost like human rats in a way they're portrayed, and kind of that's how they're looked on by other people. Rat City, essentially, and that's kind of what we have here. So I actually appreciated this page in that sense. I thought it was a little funny, the like, it's definitely a no prize answer of like, well, not the Bowery, not the Bowery,
Right.
the Bowery, but that's fine. We'll move on from that. But it's that first page. The rest of this issue is basically Cog taking them deeper into Rat City and just explaining more of who Al Simmons is and what the whole deal is with heaven and hell, trying to bring them up to speed.
And this is, yeah, I mean, this is really bridging the gap that it's crazy because the last couple of issues in this one as well, we're getting way back into Billy Kincaid stuff that hasn't really been festering for 60 issues. Sam and Twitch kind of ignored it. Things have happened to them because in the aftermath of that, but like they weren't asking direct questions about it, and then suddenly they are again. And so Cog is just like, okay, here's the deal. He really lays that all out for them. For folks who, and again, this is why this is such a catch-up issue for new readers. For folks who don't have access to Spawn #5, we get a look at Billy Kincaid right here, kind of as he's strung up.
Yeah.
It's still a pretty like gruesome scene, but it's like you said, this is the clip show version of Spawn to this point.
It's kind of interesting seeing Greg Capullo's take on some of these images.
Mm-hmm.
And again, these are all just single splash pages. We get one of, and I don't hate the drawing. I actually kind of like it. I like that some of it gets a little more attention because there's not as much to draw. All the backgrounds are very deep black. In some ways, it really works. It almost feels like, what is it, The Clown at Midnight, that Grant Morrison Batman issue that's all text or mostly text. That's kind of weirdly prosaic. It's almost like that. And there are some bits in here, some beats that are interesting. Cog he basically promises them information and delivers. He explains to them and to the reader in a way that the reason that Spawn picked them to drop off Billy Kincaid is that he innately sensed that they were the kind of crusaders of justice that he could get to help him on his way as he finds and evildoers and destroys them. Basically, kind of manipulating them into being part of his way of finding evildoers whose souls he can then send to hell. And he's not making them do bad things, but kind of manipulating their own senses of justice, much as his has been done by Malbolgia.
Right. And he's really trying to justify, and Cog kind of explains this, that he's justifying the work that he's doing because no matter what, he's still in Malbolgia's employ. He's still working for Hell to create Hell's armies. But because he's a man and he's flawed in some way, he's justifying what he's doing. That Billy Kincaid is just his first kill. He'll do that again, but he's using Sam and Twitch as a means to be like, well, at least they were bad people. So, it's not as bad because I did a good thing. And also, Cog explains that Spawn is frequently confused and doesn't really know why he does the things that he does.
Yeah, he says that's a condition of all Hellspawn. He kind of lays out, he doesn't give them Al Simmons' full name, but he lays out his backstory, same as for the readers, which is that he was a promising young soldier who was kind of roped into working for the USSC, the United States Security Council. Used to just be the CIA in earlier issues, but it's kind of been changed, whatever. That's
I guess the Security Council can
you can do a lot more different. You can do more with the fictional
Yeah.
kind of thing. It's kind of like having Hydra instead of like just the Nazis.
Here's my
You
first
know?
really frustrating thing about these illustrations, though. They don't really line up with the prose so that you know what you're looking at.
Yes, they line up sort of, but they don't exactly tell a story the way that you expect comic art to be telling a story with the words.
Like
So
behind
some of
Billy
it,
Kincaid is Chief Banks with the gun that he, ended his life with and the shot glass, but there's no reference to any of that in the prose. So it's not really clear who that guy is and why he's there.
right, that's kind of reminders for the people who've seen it. Like I said, it's the equivalent of a clip show, where when
Yeah.
you watch a TV clip show, you get a little bit of context for what's happening, and there's usually something given that gives you something shown that gives you some level of understanding, but they don't explain every character in the scene or every bit of symbolism. It's the very much the comic book equivalent of that. We get a picture of Jessica Priest here. She has officially just kind of been written in over Chapel. We don't have to go back over that again. But yeah, so Cog explains that Al Simmons, who he tells them is named Al, of course, but not Simmons, was a promising soldier who was roped into the USSC and kind of manipulated into being a killing machine because that's where he had potential. He was good at following orders, great physical potential, a great soldier and fighter. And so he was basically manipulated into doing a lot of things he didn't want to do. When the time came for them to cut the cord, he was sent to hell, made a deal with Malbolgia, who he didn't know. This gives us a little more detail here and a little bit more of a kind of a sort of forward way than we've gotten before, that Al was enveloped in darkness. He heard a voice that offered him a deal to go see his wife again. He agreed, thinking it was God, and he was tricked. It wasn't God, it was Malbolgia, which
Right.
is, the oldest trick in the world. The oldest trick in the book, literally.
It makes Al a little bit more sympathetic, and we'll
Yes.
get more into the morality of Spawn as this issue kind of goes on, because this is Todd also really trying to parse what any of it means. And it's
Right.
weird because he wants you to see Al as a hero, and he really needs to reposition him as good, and that his reason for his death is that he had a moral dilemma and that he was questioning the things he was being asked to do, which puts him in kind of the same place where now that he's in the employ of Malbolgia instead of the CIA or Jason Wynn or the United States Security Council or whatever, he's having that same dilemma and he's trying to like work through it, even though maybe it's all for nothing.
Yeah, I do love this double page splash of Spawn here, with the big guns and the bat and the cape. It's just an awesome, that's a sick ass poster of Spawn, basically. Out of there's no context to it, but it's, basically, again, now Cog explaining to them that because of the deal, he is a Hellspawn, a general in Hell's army, or at least a general in training. He explains the whole mission, that he's become sent back to Earth to kill bad people, to send more people to hell, to be part of Malbolgia's army, and that we learn a little more. There's a little bit of massaging of some of the mythos here that I think is interesting. First off, Cog basically says a Hellspawn's natural state is confusion, and that's because Hell is constantly confusing them, because that's the only way they can keep tricking them. They want to keep them in a state of vulnerability, and if they learn too much about who and what they are, they can rebel against Hell. He kind of basically lays out that hell and heaven are real, that good and evil are real, but they are decisions people make and not things that they are. And people are drafted, kind of. There's this kind of interesting thing where it says Attila the Hun is not in hell, even though he's questionable, because he didn't choose the path of the Hellspawn that could have been his. So it's just interesting. It kind of reinforces this weird amorphous version of what good and evil are, in terms of more teams that are picking their side than anything.
I think the frustration I have with that is that it just doesn't make any sense.
I actually think it does. I think it makes a lot of sense.
I don't know.
And
because he brings up Hitler and Mother Teresa later.
That's very simplistic. I think that's a very simplified thing, saying he brings up Hitler and Mother Teresa as examples of who knows why Hitler chose to be evil, and chose to do those evil things. Who knows why Mother Teresa had the reputation she had? We don't need to get into the truth behind Mother Teresa.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that it's, but why she, at least, as a figure of like beatific mercy, why she is that person. It's basically saying no one knows why they chose that path, but those are things they chose, not things that they are. And heaven and hell therefore chose them based on their actions, not necessarily like this is a good person, this is an evil person. That's what it's kind of saying. Al Simmons isn't necessarily an evil person, but he did a lot of evil shit. And when the time came for hell to ask for his embrace, he said yes. He fell for the deal.
Yeah.
So it's a very,
I think it's
like almost weird, a very Gnostic kind of version of like good and evil in a way, where it's about knowledge and action more than an elemental version of what those things are.
Right,
because
like something innate and impossible to sort of grab onto, because choices are something that you can understand. Good choice versus bad choice. Kill somebody,
right.
Don't kill somebody, et cetera, et cetera. I guess that does kind of work, especially in a world of superheroes, right?
Well,
the
that's
Punisher
what he says also.
Is an example of this, right? He does bad things, but like he's a good guy generally.
Well, that's kind of what it's saying here. He says he has to fight supervillains. We got to look at some of his rogues gallery, not all of whom I'd classify as supervillains. But he says he has to fight supervillains. They challenge his morality and test him and that kind of thing. We also get a look at his throne. Cog shows the throne to Sam and Twitch, and there are bones and body parts in it. But there's a little bit of a retcon here where it says those are not people Spawn has killed. They are people who have died in Rat City. Now, before it was kind of said it was both.
Yeah.
And it kind of...
He's destroyed his throne a few times, though. So at this point,
it's made of trash. It's swarming with maggots. And I do like this image we get of the K7 Letho when it explains that. It explains the whole thing.
Yeah,
it explains cool. It explains the 5-year gap, and that he thought it was just moments between his death and his rebirth, but it was 5 years. Part of Hell's plan to separate him from his former life. It explains that Hellspawn are made of necroplasm, and that therefore, because they are Hell's children, they're damned to death by heaven. And it says they're all damned to death by beheading. Now, I didn't go back and look at Spawn number 10, I think it was, that Angela debuted in, where she kills the medieval... 9. Yes, thank you.
Yes,
Spawn number 9.
They are killed by beheading. That's in the handbook or whatever.
Yes. Well, they killed by beheading with her lance. And it kind of also says that the lance can kill them. And so there was this whole thing about why did Spawn survive the lance, touching the lance, and the power of the lance's attack. And I think they're kind of codifying here like, it's the beheading. It's the beheading that matters. The lance is just a weapon that's good against Hellspawn.
I don't hate these two images here, the one with Angela and Malbolgia. However, the way that they're laid out, again, is telling a reader the wrong thing. Because the way that it's, one, you don't know who this little old lady is.
I want to say, though, I kind of like it. You don't know who the little old lady is. Here's what I like, knowing who these characters are. Here's what I like about it. One, having the old lady as the big main focal point wouldn't look that interesting. Let's be honest. She's not as dynamic a character as Angela,
Yeah.
2, though, it kind of speaks to the nature of the different sides of the conflict. So I'll describe the image real quick. It's a back-to-back image. On the left side is a big splash of Angela with an inset drawing of the little old lady who we've seen portrayed as God, basically. Yeah. And on the right side is a really big drawing of Malbolgia filling the page with an inset of Clown, who we know is the minion of Malbolgia. It speaks to the way these characters so far have handled the conflict, I actually think. God has been very in the background. We rarely see her. She's mostly hands off. The angels are doing what they do in this corporate hierarchy where they're all answering to the people above them. They're all kind of filtered through their bosses and their bosses' bosses and their bosses' bosses, to the point where God is absolved almost of whatever they do. God stands there and says, there's that thing at the end of where we meet her, that arc where she's kind of like, well, he's the one. He has to make the choice on his own. She's not trying to force a choice. She is enforcing a hierarchy. Now, Malbolgia, on the other hand, is just a puppet master with minions. And that's how he sees himself, or they see themselves, or it sees itself. That's how it interacts with the world around it. That's how it interacts with its creatures. It takes great glee in being directly responsible for all their actions. And it's constantly telling Spawn, everything you do is according to my whims and my plans. It is also perfect. I'm going to get into a little bit of esoteric Satanism here.
Sure.
Which I don't think is necessarily the intent, but I like the way it plays out, because for those listeners who aren't aware, TLDR on Satanism as a philosophy is not a belief in a biblical Satan. That's Christianity. Satanism is a belief in that the individual is equal to God, which is derived from the semi-apocryphal story of the fall of Lucifer, the angel that was one of God's greatest archangels, who fell to hell because he put himself on a pedestal at the same level of God. Basically said, there's a famous quote, I'd rather rule in hell than serve in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And here, that works with what Malbolgia does, because Malbolgia is constantly putting itself on the same level as God in a way that even God in this story doesn't do. Malbolgia is constantly saying, like, I'm in charge. I'm the puppet master. Everything is my whim. When we met God before, she basically said he's the one, but he has to figure it out. Put the power in Al's hands. So I don't necessarily know that, Greg and Todd and everybody at all were thinking in those terms in designing these pages, but that's kind of why I like the layout, because it speaks to the hierarchy of each side of the conflict in a way that I think is actually pretty cool.
All right, you convinced me. I like it a little bit more now, even though I also typically just don't like comics like this that are extremely text heavy and using splash pages. However, it's functional here. I get why they're doing it. So
I'm kind of taking for granted the fact that, like, we would rather have a comic that has actual storytelling in it.
Yeah.
And just taking this issue for what it is. I do think it's an interesting way to present this story to ideally readers who are maybe have never even read a comic before, because the cover of this issue, as you showed me before and we maybe mentioned, is a still from the movie.
Right.
So
it's Todd
clearly
McFarlane
marketed.
meeting Spawn.
It's clearly marketed directly at people who are coming in this from the movie. I almost feel like it's a little directed at people who don't know how to read a comic.
I can see
who
that.
don't know how to do the sequential reading. I don't think this is doing them any favors when the next issue comes around if he wants them to pick it up.
Yeah.
But I think there's something relatable about that. And I do think the quality of the illustrations is at least nice. The prose, questionable, functional.
Yeah. Functional. I think the quality of the images is just like, well, this is what Spawn looks like. So be ready for that. And I do think that Greg, especially with like the K7 Letha suit and stuff, you get to see some cool stuff. I very specifically love his curse and his tremor. I think they're really cool.
Yeah, the splash of the villains is kind of cool. I do think it's interesting that Tremor gets lumped in here along with kind of Cygor, as they're both more pawns than anything, but they're enemies or antagonists of Spawn. I wouldn't call them super villains at this point, which is kind of the implication by Cog, but here's where, it kind of winds up with Cog agreeing to go downtown with Sam and Twitch to answer more questions, and basically him explaining that Spawn has created a bond between them all because of that, the death of Billy Kincaid, a bloody bond that now binds them all together, and that they are now twisted in fate with Spawn wherever his own machinations lead.
Yeah, and Cog says basically like, all right, we got to get out of here because we shouldn't hang around here. You should be invited into Spawn's lair, not just show up
Yeah.
there. So they kind of like leave Rat City. As they're leaving, Spawn is kind of overhead heading home, and Cog notices, but the Sam and Twitch do not. But Cog doesn't say anything. And
oh, he did also. I want to say one thing that he revealed that we didn't bring up is that Cog revealed to them, not to us. We already knew this. Is that he is a Spawn as well?
Right. Because they're like, oh, how do you know?
Something like a Spawn. Yeah. So that brings us to 66. Hit us with those credits.
Spawn number 66. Todd McFarlane and Image Comics presents Demons. Story by Todd McFarlane, pencils by Greg Capullo, inks by Todd McFarlane, Chance Wolfe, copy editor and lettering by Tom Warzikowski, colors by Brian Haberlin and Dan Kemp. No design credit here, and I think that's mainly because the inside cover now has gone from the Spawn movie image to this sort of like new sort of movie image, but like it's like rotting. It's, I don't know, it's like kind of 3D art. I can't really.
I do want to give a very quick content warning on this issue in particular. There's a scene that involves some self-harm. It's supernatural, but it is very also mundane. We'll get into it. I won't dwell on it too much, but I just want to put that out there, and I'll just bring it up again when it's going to come, because it's just one of those things that it's there. So
this is also dedicated to the memory of Mary Kolomajic, the inspiration for Granny Blake.
Yes.
So Wanda's grandma.
Actual Wanda's. Yes.
Actual, yeah. So cool.
Yeah, we pick up where the last issue kind of left off, with Cog going with Sam and Twitch downtown. They're basically asking him, basically telling him, I don't like what you said about Spawn manipulating us.
Yeah.
And he says, look, it doesn't matter either way, because your fates have been intertwined regardless. And, they kind of are like, I suppose that means that Sam says, I suppose Twitch and I are supposed to just forget then that Spawn cost us our jobs. And he kind of starts castigating Cog over like all the weird shit that's gone on between them. But he suddenly realizes that Cog's just gone. He's not in the back seat anymore.
Yeah, he disappeared.
He's done his weird Cog thing and just vanished. Yes.
Some fun cartooning from Greg here with Twitch specifically, as he
slams on the brakes.
He slams on the brakes. By the way, do you notice what that sound effect is?
Yes, it's Creech, and it looks like the logo of the Creech, honestly.
Yeah, that's
which
Greg
is a Greg Capullo comic. Yes.
Pretty cool.
I love this. He slams on the brakes. The car kind of slams to a halt, and Twitch's face is smashed against the glass. Coloring and art, everything works really well here to sell what it is.
Yeah.
Like, just a really great panel. Back in the alley, I want to give a little reminder here to readers. In the last arc we covered in last episode, Al's face had returned. His human face. He was struck by a bolt of this heavenly energy. Somehow it restored his face. He went to Terry and was like, look, my face is back. I'm coming for my wife. When I get back from telling Jason Wynn what's what, I'm going to take my wife back.
Yeah, and so he ended that with "We're enemies now," Terry.
Yeah. Yes.
So this is 3 issues ago. This is 63.
Yeah. So he has his face back. Cog warns him, don't waste this chance on going to fight Jason Wynn, because you never know how long this is going to last. You never know what's going to happen. You can't count on it.
And
so go
in
use
64,
this.
We saw that towards the end of his encounter with Jason Wynn, his face starts,
it melted away.
Yeah.
It melted away. The skin melted away. He went back to being good old worm-faced, maggoty Spawn. However, Al hasn't seemed to realize that, the same way he didn't initially realize that his face had returned to normal.
Right.
This little thing, it's funny, we talked about this exact bit.
Mm-hmm.
We joked about they should have done this. So it's almost really sad here, but kind of goofy. It's almost like a very like trauma kind of like Toxic Avenger kind of thing, because Al puts on his suit, he transforms his, his costume into a suit. It's a double-breasted suit and a like high-necked shirt, looking like he's headed in his Sunday best. He puts on his shades and he's walking down the street with corpse face. It looks like a TikTok or something, because they are not even holding back this time. It's the same pose of him walking down the street head on, and they're just quoting
Staying
the
alive.
Bee Gees, yeah, Staying Alive. And I won't sing it again, but it becomes part of the narration, and people are just staring at him.
Yeah,
And
it's the same bunch
slowly,
of people that we had seen the last time that were like asking him if he wanted
yeah.
like prostitutes or,
Well, then he comes upon a street gang, and not the kind that sings doo-wop. They're hanging out on the corner, just chilling, and they start making fun of him, like just roasting his roasted face. And he doesn't take kindly to it. He looks in the mirror and he realizes that his face is fucked again. Now, I love another great panel, this panel of him looking at his face. The cartooning and the look and the expression on like Maggot Spawn's face here as he realizes it's back to being Hamburger. Sad.
Yeah.
Tragic.
Obviously, he's angry. He gets in a fight with these guys. They don't show much of the fight. He just basically says like that Spawn ended it quickly, and he kind of
They're
moves
left
on.
alive for
Yeah,
once. He doesn't like brutalize them. He just kind of tussles with them and moves on. We get a check-in with the Fitzgerald Blake family, or the Blake Fitzgerald family. It's Granny and Wanda hanging out with Cyan, who's roughhousing with the puppy. I kind of love the drawings of Cyan with the puppy, because there's just nothing better than a kid and a dog. Everybody, it's
yeah,
cute,
it's good.
you know. And the dog, as they're playing, gets a hold of the pacifier that's on the shoelace that once held Spawn's rotting face together, and runs off with it. And as soon as it runs away,
A hidden memory is triggered, and she starts
yes,
crying. A nightmare has been released.
Cyan remembers all the stuff that happened with Clown, where she was kidnapped and forced to draw. This, again, these two panels of the dog looking all happy, like, let's keep playing, and Cyan kind of just looking like this blank expression. She freaks out. She has a freak out. The dog kind of surrenders the pacifier because it's like, oh God. Wanda has to separate Cyan from the puppy, gives her back the pacifier, notices that it's really the shoelace that she's fixated on. And as soon as she has it, it kind of calms her down. It seems to supernaturally dispel those memories.
Yeah, I really like the panel of her getting the pacifier necklace back with these silhouettes of Granny Blake and Wanda behind her, where we can
Yeah.
see their furrowed brows and their eyes, but otherwise they're just kind of outlines because Cyan is like not paying attention to them at all now. She's so
No,
focused on this object. However, we're getting a little bit of their feelings, which is it's a really nice panel. It's
it
super
is.
simple, but
But also reflects something I think about childhood in a way, where when you're a kid and you fixate on something like that, there is a bit of that feeling of like not really understanding even the rest of the world, like knowing the same things we know about Granny and Wanda here, that they're sad and concerned about what's going on and trying to figure that out. I love that Greg Capullo is getting better at drawing Cyan and better at drawing a child,
yeah,
because these faces are looking more and more like a cartooned child in a really expressive and engaging way. It feels like he maybe went back and looked at some like comic strips and some cartoons and stuff like that, and took some lessons.
A lot of cartoonists have the problem where they sort of just draw kids as tiny adults, and they
We've seen
don't.
it plenty in this comic.
Yeah, and then they end up kind of looking like weird nightmares. But this is starting to work a lot better. Meanwhile,
Also
back in the
love.
alley. Oh, what?
Also, just want to note real quick, I love the puppy too. I love the drawing
Oh,
of the
yeah. The
puppy.
puppy looks less like a nightmare also.
Yes, I love especially
That
the one
dog
where
has
it's
looked
expectantly like
rough.
sitting up. It has a bit of a more Disney quality to it.
Mhm.
Again, I want to give Greg credit and say I think that he probably went back and studied some, like, not just real dogs and real kids, obviously, but like some cartooning that people had done successfully of children and animals, and kind of dug
Yeah,
into that.
absolutely. Meanwhile, back in Spawn's alley, he is destroying everything because
Yeah,
he's
he's
upset.
it's that scene in Walk Hard where he's ripping 15 sinks off the wall and like bending every spoon in the drawer. He's binging on maggots.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
And Cog obviously is like, you're a dummy. And Spawn doesn't really want to hear it. And I'm a little bit. I understand that this has to be a little bit of a reset for potential new readers who have not necessarily seen Spawn like this. And if last issue was your first issue, then you didn't see Spawn at all.
yeah.
And if you've only seen the movie, then I guess this helps you sort out. This is not too far off from the movie, I guess, like, because it's the beginning of
No,
Spawn,
it's pretty bog standard. Cog telling Spawn something he's told him 50 times. I mean, we did just get the issue establishing that Spawn is actually confused. He is, like,
Yeah.
by nature confused, and that his body and mind are kind of at war, and he's resetting himself because of hell. So we'll give him a little bit of a pass. That's kind of the characterization. That does feel a little bit like Todd looking back over those issues and being like, man, he doesn't get it ever. I have to have something happen at some point.
Yeah.
Here, he especially doesn't get it. Cog is telling him, like, you should have taken that opportunity, that moment you had to have that reconnection with your wife, to go to her and show her your face and be like, look, here's the truth. You should have taken that instead of using it on revenge. And you used it on revenge and you paid the price, which is that opportunity was cost you. And Spawn is just like, somebody should have warned me. How could I have known? Cog having very, very much told him the same thing, like, don't waste this opportunity on revenge. You never know when it's going to go away. So
The thing that's crazy here is also that this is another opportunity for Cog to actually answer more of Al's questions, and he says, like, how was I supposed to know that? And he's like, well, because I told you, but you, he says, I thought I could be a man again. Cog says you can be, but not your way.
yeah, and he tells them, you can't go back. You have to be better than what you were. And we learn, I mean, we have to assume that there is a path to having some level of humanity because as a Spawn, because we've got Cog here. I like this beat where they're having the argument and Spawn is like, Cog says, question what's happening. Perhaps you'll find the purpose you're truly meant to fulfill. Until you acquire the proper knowledge, hell will always have the upper hand. And Spawn says, then let it. I don't have the strength anymore. The fight isn't in me. And I love this panel of Cog where he's like, liar.
Yeah.
And kind of confronts him on it. Now, here's where I have a little bit. I just want to give a quick trigger warning about self-harm, because Spawn, in his
Anguish.
grief, yes, his
Yeah.
anguish over his face going away again, which Cog says is because his costume rejected it. It was
Right.
a boon from heaven, assumedly. Hell didn't want that. Spawn takes a dagger or a knife or even maybe a sharp bone.
It's like a
It's like a shard of like metal from the wreckage of his throne, which he's just trashed, and stabs himself over and over. And he says, I just wanted to see my wife. That's all. I didn't ask to live in this goddamn nightmare, and I can't do anything about it. I can't even kill myself. I can't die. Don't you understand? I can't die. I can't die. And as heavy as it is to see him just impaling himself and stabbing himself over and over,
gets the point across.
this page is so impactful and
Yeah.
effective. It's just so gut wrenching, literally and just emotionally. Like the green as he's stabbing himself and the goo everywhere, and like the sequential storytelling of like the close-ups and peelbacks and everything here culminating on his like anguished face is just really great. It's some of
Yeah.
the really, really great stuff we get in
And
this
it
issue.
kicks off with that panel on the page before of him crying. That's
I
really
was
great.
just gonna
So
say
great. So great. And it's
some
crazy
of
because
that.
it's almost hidden behind the panel above it. It's not like blink and you'll miss it because there's a lot of focus placed on it, but just some really good stuff. It really cues you up for what's about to happen a little bit. You can understand Al isn't a character that we see in his Spawn form. He has emotions. He has really big emotions. We don't really see him cry though. And so
We rarely see sorrow. He rarely lets
yeah,
himself express that. He turns it into anger, and that's something that Cog kind of says in the previous issue as well. Is that like because that's his instinct and that's what he was taught to do is to kill and to turn his sorrow into rage. Those instincts are what he's falling back on, and we see it time and time again. Every time he starts to make progress, when he's confronted with a rock in a hard place, he goes back to that killer instinct. He gets cold as ice and he starts tearing people apart. He tells Terry they're not friends anymore, they're enemies.
right.
He fucks up Tremor's brother and then leaves him for dead so that Tremor has to help him instead of fighting. It's this whole thing where he becomes this cold, emotionless killer that hell wants him to be. And so you can see that cycle over and over again that it's trying to create. And with that veneer, that retrospect on it, you can see how the conversations that Cog has had with him, especially with the one he has in this issue where he says you can't go back, you have to go forwards. You can see how Cog has been through this same process, it seems
Mm-hmm.
like, and has maybe mastered some of those instincts. And it puts some credit on Al's name a little bit to say like, well, he's fighting through this.
Yeah, and again, it does reposition Al as a lot more sympathetic because, again, to sort of couch this and possibly being a new reader's first couple of issues, you haven't seen the stuff that he's done. There's
Right.
not detail given to like hit Spawn Across America with the Ku Klux Klan thing, and to Eddie and Andy. Frank, the two kids, and like we haven't gotten specifics. So to tell this story in these big broad strokes, I think is pretty helpful because I think it at least just gets you on board. It also just makes Al look a lot more sympathetic in general because
Yeah.
I think it would be pretty easy to write him off. Um, I brought up the Punisher earlier, but I can bring up the Punisher again just to say like Frank Castle is not a sympathetic character because Frank Castle has a body count higher than most Marvel supervillains.
Yeah, and he also is alive.
Yeah.
He lost things, but things that it's just one of those things of like it's kind of the Punisher is an interesting counterpoint to Spawn in a way because the Punisher is the worst case scenario of what happens when you survive, and
Right.
Spawn is in some ways a man trying to make the most of losing everything.
Yeah.
The Punisher is the full expression of like the anger of survivors, not survivors' guilt, but survivors' anger.
Mm.
And like what happens when you just stop at that phase of like grief. Al's really trying to go through it here. And the thing is, he keeps getting dragged back down to this base level of hellish emotion,
Yeah.
which I'll buy that it's on purpose. I'll buy because we keep seeing it over and over that hell keeps dragging him down. I love this page, the next page, after he goes through and he's stabbing himself. He's got the gaping wounds. First off, I love Cog here without the hat, like his face looking grim. I love Spawn hunched over,
Leaking
looking just totally
necroplasm.
defeated, leaking necroplasm, his face in total just defeat and grief and anguish, and the necroplasm leaking down and forming the
Borders.
borders
Yeah.
for some of the later page. I love how he's now hurt. The worms and the bats and everything and the rats are all coming in. I love the panel of all the huge cloud of bats swarming down to Spawn to help heal him. But yeah, at the very top, here's where Cog says, "We all have our crosses to bear, but if it's redemption you seek, then learn. A second chance has been given to you. The quest isn't to become a man again, but to become better than you were before."
It is interesting because it is kind of something that gets echoed in the back matter, and we'll get to
Yeah.
that
He says
a
that's
little
how
bit
you'll
later.
finally be free.
But it's interesting because I think that earlier I was saying that it's been hard to parse very specifics about Todd in some cases, right? But this is actually something that speaks directly to Todd McFarlane, and we'll
Yeah,
put a pin in that. I'm going to bring it back up later.
we'll bring it back. Okay.
We're going to check in with Terry here. He's at a business meeting, a late business meeting at
At
a
a
fine
at a
diner.
fine diner. Yeah, a fine
Okay.
diner.
And
Okay.
gets
Our
the
nicest
bill.
Waffle House.
Gets the bill. He gets a call from Wanda, who tells him that some weird stuff is happening in Cyan, not for any reason other than she thinks that he'd want to know, which is a weird bit of narration, but sure. Like, it's not.
I mean,
I don't know that has to get explained, but it's fine. He gets
I
somebody.
don't know that he even needs to get this call,
Yeah,
but I think it's just to show their parenting relationship.
sure.
Like, but yeah, no, it is a little weird.
It does
But
help underline their connection right away before Spawn kind of calls him into an alley, and
yeah,
Terry's like, "Al, like, what are you doing? And like, what happened to your face?" And Al now has recommitted himself to Terry and his initial plan of taking down Jason Wynn, which he had already threatened Jason Wynn with. But now he's like, oh, I want Terry back on my side. And rightfully so, Terry gets pretty angry with him and is like, you said we were enemies. You said that like you were going to steal Wanda from me. Like, why should I help you? I don't like being threatened. Like, do you not remember that everything that has just transpired? I mean, it
yeah.
literally has to be a day or two before this.
Well, Spawn has this moment where, first off, just to note it, I love the panel of him looking down in the baseball cap. We get
Sad
that great
eyes.
Chance Wolf inking of his face. Really growing to enjoy Chance Wolf as an inker
Me too.
for Greg Capullo, really, really strongly. He has this moment where he kind of comes to Terry with his head down and is like, look, it doesn't matter anymore. I thought things would last. I hope things would be different, but they aren't. No matter how high I try to change what I've become, no matter how hard I try to change what I've become, this curse, these powers, I can't beat it. The sooner I accept it, the better we'll all be. And Terry's like, you're not making sense. First trying to meet him in the middle, and then Al throws him this curveball. And this is where Terry fucking rightly is like, what are you fucking talking about? Al says, what I'm trying to say is, I'm willing to make a go of it again. Go through the plans we had to bring Wynn to his political knees. If we disrupt enough of his foreign strongholds, his allies will turn on him. Terry says, what about Wanda? And here's where Al says, she can't see me like this or even know I'm alive. You keep her happy for now. And it's that for now that just sends. Like if he had said she can't see me like this or know I'm alive, she's better off with you. You were right. I can't disrupt,
He doesn't even apologize.
No, he doesn't. Because, I mean, to be fair, again, he's this being of hellish emotion. He's not like a fully formed emotional being. I also get the feeling that Al Simmons, not a truly emotionally evolved man to begin with.
Yeah, he is extremely short-sighted, but also weirdly is playing the long game here. He says for now because he thinks, well, if Cog wasn't lying, I can kind of become a man again.
He'll find a way.
Right.
He'll find a
But
way.
this is what's
But
more
Terry's
important now
just
while I
like,
look like a zombie monster.
Terry's just like, are you fucking serious for now? Fuck this. Guess what? I'm calling Wanda right now and going to tell her that you're alive and she has to choose between the two of us. I'm not hiding anything from my wife anymore. And Al freaks out. I love again this panel of Terry shoving the phone in his face.
Yeah.
And Al's like, ugh. And he just kind of immediately leaves when he hears Cyan's voice. And Terry kind of plays it off. He's like, hey, yeah, sorry, I had a weird day at the office. I'd like to take you and Cyan out. And she's just like, I would love that.
Yeah. I even really like that panel of Terry there too, where his resolve is kind of, hey, fuck you, Spawn.
Yeah.
Just great.
Terry's kind of showing also that he has a level of conviction that Al Simmons, at least as Spawn, is incapable of having. And Spawn, as he often does when he's in his worst moments, runs back to his alley and buries himself in the creatures of the night, the children of darkness. Once again, I love the panel of him totally buried in
Worms and bats and rats.
the bat laying on his face and the worms crawling out of his mouth. Then he crawls out of it, and he kind of has the feeling he had a couple issues ago where he seems drunk. He stumbles through the alley. We see him burst through a wall, and he falls on this poor guy's leg. It reminds us that he's 400 plus pounds of necroplasm, and he breaks this poor guy's leg, and he just stumbles off. And it says, does he have any control at all? Or is he just falling further into the suffocating embrace of sin, which he literally was, just in the suffocating embrace of sin, buried in the creatures that carry the sin of darkness.
Yeah.
And it says, he rubs his temples as he feels the bizarre nausea passing, relieved that it was just some sadistic short-term virus. The tiny creature crawling out of his peripheral says otherwise. And we see a worm crawling out of the skull on his
cape.
Yeah, and it kind of implies that maybe he's kind of hitting the worms a little too hard here.
Hey, listen, we've all been there. We've all been there.
You can't tell Al Simmons when he's had enough. He'll tell you. All right? He's deep in his worms. And once again, just before we move on, I've done this a lot. Love this panel, this last panel of the issue.
Oh,
the
yeah,
inking on it is great. Spawn, like with his hand on his face. The way Chance Wolf inks Spawn's face is just immaculate. I love it.
It's really, really good. And you can tell that it's great because we are able to find it. We're able to find these great moments where you're like, oh, that's not Todd inking. That's definitely something is new here, because Danny Miki doesn't ink like that. And I guess it could be Todd inking if he's like, we know this because of what he says about Greg, which is, I think Greg draws the characters the way that they're meant to be drawn. And so now I will kind of draw the characters the way that Greg draws them. There's a chance that we are seeing Todd pages here and we're giving credit to Chance Wolf, but I like the team up overall.
But I do think that in that same way that you just said, Todd has kind of started working towards Greg's strengths. The pages that I feel like are by Chance Wolf, because of the texture and the way they're inked and the line quality and stuff, feel like they have some of the best of Todd McFarlane and Danny Miki. They have some of that delicacy of some of Danny Miki's lines. They have some of the texture of Miki's lines, but more of the boldness that Todd McFarlane often puts in his inking. I also think that some of that, like you're right, we can't know. I think some of it may be Todd emulating some of the things he's liked that Chance Wolf has done in his face and stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That texture that they're getting on some of those pages is so good, and it's really elevating this. I also think maybe the art as a whole kind of benefits from the last issue having been maybe a bit of a deadline catch up. That last issue felt a little bit like a deadline catch up, a little bit like Greg Capullo maybe saying look how much words is in this fucking script. Let's just show you what that looks like if it's just the words.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a question for you, because this is we still have a pin in that thing I said from earlier, we'll get to that. Yes. We'll get to that in the back matter, but there, Cog says why, he basically says to Al that you should have used that chance to go talk to Wanda. What happens if Al goes and sees Wanda instead of going after Jason Wynn? What happens? Because in a weird way, he's always going to go after Jason Wynn. In a weird way, do you almost feel like the more exciting story choice is for Al to come back and show up for Wanda, that now Wanda has this, now, especially if his face is going to disappear, right? Have him talk to Wanda. Have him and Terry, have Terry say to her, well, what do you want to do? There's a level of soap operatics there that maybe is a little too X-Men-y, or literally a soap opera, Days of Our Lives. My ex-husband is back from the dead. But I think it could work, and I think it maybe adds a little bit more stakes to those relationship dynamics. That scene with Terry would be a lot different.
I think it depends what happens, because there's a version of that scene that takes all the wind out of the sails of the whole thing, because they get closure the way that, maybe Al doesn't realize he really is what he wants. Because he keeps saying all he wanted in the beginning was to see his wife one more time. And he's seen her, but he hasn't held her.
Right.
And told her he loves her and given her himself the moment of closure that he sold his soul for. He hasn't had the moment that he sold his soul for. You almost wonder if the version of that story is told where he gets that moment, does he then just say, okay, well, I guess I'm just a hellspawn now. I give myself over. Does it spur him on to become better, to move forward and find that as the path to freedom, as Cog said? I think there's a lot of opportunity for that to kind of flat tire parts of the story that it's very clear Todd is really going to be drawing on for a while. I also do think, though, there is a version of it, like you said, that maybe raises the stakes. The question is if Wanda has that ultimatum put to her of choose between Al and Terry right now, and Al's face is lost again. What happens if she had picked Al?
Yeah. That's kind of what I'm saying is
yeah, I'm just saying that's one of those questions that escalates their relationship in a whole different way. I think we get maybe some of the same end result where Terry is like, look, man, fuck you. You can't keep being like, my face is good, my face is bad.
Yeah.
Whatever I want to do, you're pawns in my life, which is kind of how we see that he instinctively is treating people as a hellspawn. So, I think that's an interesting question. I don't know that it makes. I think there are more versions of that make Al's unlife worse than versions that make it better. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
I'm just thinking it it's just a thought experiment to do. I'm not trying to rewrite.
Oh, no. I think it's interesting, though.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because it's almost like if instead of a random guy in an alleyway saw Spawn's face and it was Wanda instead or Terry instead, and that
Right.
I don't know. Obviously, there's going to be more Terry, Wanda, and Al stuff moving forward. I do think that this
Yeah.
does again. I'm thinking about also from a new reader, putting that relationship dynamic so at the forefront, which that scene does. The scene that we actually got does, but does it give you a greater understanding and also maybe make Wanda more of a character? One of the weaknesses of Spawn still to this point is that there's not a lot of women that have speaking roles in meaningful ways, except as kind of archetypes.
Aside from Angela, really.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and even she is definitely still a femme fatale more than anything else.
Definitely a 90s bad girl.
Yeah.
So
she gets an interesting voice at times, but yeah. No, I think so. What I think would be interesting would be to see Wanda have some agency in this whole thing, because that's really what it all comes down to. And I think I kind of like Terry's instinct with it. It seems a little bit like, fuck it, I'll burn whatever bridge it's going to take to get us across this river. But I like that there's a little bit of Terry's instinct is to put Wanda's agency at it. You can't come here and tell me I'm keeping Wanda warm for you.
right.
That's not fair to either of us. If anyone's making a decision like this, it's going to be her. So you have to let her make it. You can't just put it on me to wait for you to come along and give you my wife back, which I like that Terry is another person in Al's life who has a better process and a better thought process, it seems, for taking personal responsibility for what's about to happen and moving his life forward at least a step.
Yeah, and much like Sam and Twitch, as it has been explained, the people in Spawn's life are put there to be part of his plans. He uses Terry much more overtly in that way, than he has Sam and Twitch to this point. But like, in a way, Wanda is also that. In a way, Granny Blake is also
Yeah.
that. All of these characters kind of exist in that, and I like the framing from the sort of clip show issue to when you see this moment with Terry. It gives you that understanding, like, oh, Terry's like wrapped up in this now too, and that we kind of see even with Cyan and the pacifier and the shoelace. Oh, Cyan is wrapped up in this too, and these are things that will, even to this day, stay true, which is to Todd and the other authors of Spawn's credit that they're able to keep that, somewhat consistent. Not maybe not always at the forefront of what the book is trying to do, but it is how superheroes maintain their longevity, right? Is that we're able to kind of keep coming back to similar ideas and justify characters' existence within the worlds that they're created
Yeah.
in. So I put a pin in something earlier, and
Let's get to it.
it was Cog saying, that we all have our crosses to bear, but if it's redemption you seek, then learn. A second chance has been given to you. The quest is to become a man again, but to become better than you were before. That's how you'll finally be free. Now, so there's a person named Mike Magooter who writes in and says, "Congrats on the success." Yeah, says, "Congrats on the success of your movie. I hope we'll see a sequel. The reason why I write is to commend you on your perseverance. I can only imagine what kind of Herculean task it takes to develop a story/character for 16 years from nothing but an idea into a top-selling comic, toy, and now movie business. You have many have the ideas, only a few put them into action. As one of my favorite teachers points out, determine exactly what you want, what the price will cost, and begin paying that price. You must have put in many long, sometimes grueling hours at the table to produce what you have. I was wondering if you would address the issue of the price you paid to become successful in your letters column. Hours working, things sacrificed, what kind of support did you receive? Any from unexpected locations? I hope these questions might compel you to respond, as I'm sure there are many other fans of yours wondering the same thing." So first he just does a weird bit of like, well, let me clarify. I created Spawn in high school, blah, blah, blah. So, but Todd says, and I think that this is so interesting because it's in the book, in what Cog says. The price that you pay really comes in a lot of different forms. One is obviously the sweat and blood and the amount of hours that you put into it for literally years. When I was working at Marvel Comics, I would put in anywhere from 12 to 20-hour days. As many artists can tell you, there are days where you don't sleep for 48 hours except in 10-minute cat naps in order to meet deadlines, and that just becomes part of the process. If you want to be on a regular book, you have to deliver product, and the way to deliver product is getting it done. If that means staying up day and night, you have to train yourself. When you become a freelancer, one of the things you have to do is mentally and physically train yourself to do the work, because you are in an environment which is usually your own home, and that is also the same place where you do your entertaining and relaxing, and is not really meant to be a work environment. Secondly, once you train yourself,
Relatable.
yeah, for both of us.
Yeah.
Secondly, once you train yourself, then you have to train those around you so that your friends and family don't take advantage of you sitting at home, able to pick up and go at the drop of a hat. Once you have those things corralled, then you're in pretty good shape. One of the downsides of that, or one of the things that you sacrifice, is if you're spending tons of time at the drawing board, you're not spending time with the people around you who give you the inspiration to go on. That includes friends and family. And in my case, in the early part of my career before I had children, that was my wife. I thought I gave her the short end of the stick and that I kind of sold her short in the early years of our marriage because I was trying to build up my career. And that's one of the main reasons why, when I created the Spawn the story, I named the woman that Spawn trades his soul for after my own wife, Wanda. I came to grips that no matter how big and no matter how important some of the career driven goals we set for ourselves are, nothing is really as important as those we love. And it's something I try to keep in perspective and maintain a certain balance with. With the help of my wife, I've been able to create an empire, if you will. And at the same time, still not work on weekends, quit at 5:30 every day, keep normal working hours, still lead a productive life outside of my business of Spawn. If you think about what Cog says and you think about Todd's road to Spawn becoming the success that it is, the creation of Image is his second chance, and the quest was not to become what he was at Marvel again. It was to become something better. And McFarlane Productions is exactly that. It is, actually at this time, not bigger than Marvel, obviously, but Marvel having gone through bankruptcy in 1996, this being 1997, and there's a Spawn movie out that ends
They
up
were just, yeah.
grossing $87 million. That he's got his toys and his I watched from around the same time CNN did a thing called an Impact Special on Todd, and it's a little bit of a hit piece on him making something so violent, quote unquote, and that he makes toys and that they're like gross and creepy and kids like them. And he essentially says, "Oh, I'm just trying to make shit I think I would think is cool when I was 12," which is pretty much the entire vibe of Spawn anyway. But um, the they say that the Todd McFarlane Productions brings in $150 million a year in
I mean,
1997.
not bad. That's how you wind up buying those Mark McGuire baseballs.
Yeah, but they also said they asked him that they were like, well, how much would you say you had been paid by Marvel over the years that you were there? And he says, if you put it all together, he goes 2 million, which is
Not bad
also
either.
crazy. Yeah, but like does put into perspective, it wasn't about making the 2 million again. It was
No.
about, and it's not even about the money, but it is about like making something cool and like doing it better and like not being at the drawing board for 48 hours, barely sleeping.
Well, that's something I like. That, and I mean, I can't speak to what Todd McFarlane's life actually is like, or was like, or whatever is now, but I like the principle there that he's laying out,
Mm-hmm.
that success should make you a better person.
Yeah.
Having more room in your life should also give you more room in your heart. And when you chase success and find success, you should use that as a way to focus on what matters: your family, your relationship, the fruits of those things. Ideally, in a world that I live in, sharing that success with the people that help you get there, like that kind of thing. But I think it speaks to the idea of, like you said, a less metaphysical version of that same journey of like, let this make you something better. Let this make you a better person. Don't keep trying to go back to exactly what you were. When you come through something, there's a saying, the only way out is through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what Todd McFarlane is trying to do to Al Simmons here, is show him that the only way out is through. I think the lesson is you have to actually get through, you know?
Yeah. Well, and you have to set yourself up, but not once you get through, forget how you got there. And,
Right.
and
Let that be a lesson rather than a
yeah,
hindrance.
exactly. And like obviously he loves his wife. We've talked about Tom McFarlane, professional wife guy before. But that is
Yeah.
also something that's never wavered through any of these letters columns, through his entire career, it seems. It's always something that could be said about him. And it is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of, I guess because I've been at weddings the last 2 weekends. So I've been kind of love bombed by a lot of people's speeches about how much they care about each other. So then to read it
Right.
in Spawn also is like, oh, right. Guy loves his wife. That's nice.
Right. Yeah.
But it's cool because he does recognize that his relationship is so foundational to how he's able to do what he does. I think we hear stories all the time where people complain about their job and they have a dream and their partner is like, all right, quit, do it, I got your back, and that's so much of what is elemental about Spawn and about Todd's story and about it seemingly about his life. And so just great to see it echoed there, especially as somebody else that seems to have dreams is asking for advice from somebody who's a huge
Yeah.
success, right? Undeniable success. So
It's also nice, we talked at the top a little bit about how hard it can be to parse things about who Todd McFarlane is as a person. We learn a lot about who he is as a creator and how Spawn is made. And like we joked a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts potentially behind the decisions made to create that one issue. But I think it's interesting to then have a moment where he actually just tells you something about
yeah.
himself. Just tells you, and you can see it reflected in the work. It becomes a little bit of a Rosetta Stone to some of the things that are like, these are the parts of Spawn that are reflecting who Todd McFarlane really is.
Yeah.
I gotta say, one thing I like about these, and we'll get into final thoughts, I guess, here, because like we're getting close to the end, and I guess I have some to just throw out.
Sure.
First off, that first issue almost feels like a free comic book day issue or something in retrospect. Like if that was free, you'd feel like, oh, this makes total sense.
They should have given it out at the movie.
Exactly. Well, anyway, they could do a lot of stuff. But you know, I liked these 2 issues overall, actually. For that one issue just being what it is, I don't know if I would have loved it had I been a buyer of it as a monthly reader. I don't know that I really like it as a form of comics, but giving it credit again, we didn't hone in on like, this isn't a real comic, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, this is not Batman
Taking it
Orphans.
for what it is. Yeah. Taking it for what it is. It's readable. It tells you what Spawn is. It told us some things about Spawn. These issues didn't get so much into the like Jason Wynn bullshit of like, what is Jason Wynn doing? What are his machinations? Which has started to really, not having that as a component of these 2 issues makes them feel better paced and easier to read. Because it feels, those things come off as particularly juvenile and a little sophomoric and like a comic, a stereotypical comic writer's level of understanding of geopolitics. You know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, well, we're just taking for granted that this means nothing. And that like, you know,
or that
we don't
or
have
that our weird shorthand is going to be understood because hopefully readers have seen the same news report.
Right. And this is weird shorthand for a vibe. This is not trying to tell us something about politics. So having that not interrupt this kind of added to the pacing of the second issue in particular, I felt like. And I like the emotional stakes that are building between Terry and Al. I kind of like that they had that moment where they're like, bros. But it hasn't been that easy, because sometimes it's not that easy to just suddenly reset your status quo with a friend where things are weird.
Yeah, and also, like I said, you know, Al really owes Terry an apology.
Yeah, he
and he
does.
doesn't get that, and you know,
He doesn't get a lot.
Right. Final thoughts for me. You know, in talking about these issues, I ended up liking them a lot more, which tends to happen with this book. I am not a fan of the way the, you know, big splash pages with lots of text, very prosy, partly because Todd's not great at writing prose. Also partly because Greg is a great artist, and like I want to see some of the things that are being described. Like,
right.
It's not Todd's job to teach people how to read comic books, but if the goal of this was to put pictures and words in front of somebody and be like, this is a comic book, maybe a couple of pages being this big kind of splashy thing, but with a few just 9-panel grids, right? Like Jack Kirby kind of straight ahead, use Wally Wood's 23 panels that always work.
Sure.
Keep the visual language.
This feels a little like a storybook.
It is, and that's exactly what I was going to say. This is a storybook, and that's fine, kind of. If the audience is not, if I was picking this up like monthly, I would be annoyed because I'd be like, "What is this? I don't need this."
I spent my $3 or whatever on this.
$1.95. Price has never gone up, or at this point it hasn't. I don't think. But well, actually, let me double check. Yeah, it's $1.95. I think it's $2.95 now, maybe $3.95. Anyway, I like the second issue a lot more in general, partly just because it's a normal comic book, but I like that in doing all that recap, the book gets recentered around Al, Terry, and Wanda. Yeah, there's Cog. Right. Yes, there's Sam and Twitch stuff, but we're sort of like putting ourselves back at square one, except that Spawn does have more knowledge now. And so hopefully he can kind of start over and do things correctly this time. he kind of keeps getting second chances or third chances. We already saw him go to hell. And that's the thing. The recap doesn't even get into that stuff, really. It doesn't
right.
It really pares the story back down to, okay, what's really important? Spawn loves his wife. He's dead. He is in Hell's Army. Okay, go. And you're right. Not having all the Jason Wynn bullshit. Not having Clown, honestly. I like Clown, but Clown's another character that sometimes drags the book in this direction that he can be fun and he's visually interesting and it's fun when they fight. Explaining him is not always the easiest. And so again, if this is a new reader arc or new reader couple of issues, then I think not having him around, just having him appear quickly, just sort of makes the book a little bit easier to engage with, which is good, which is really good. One thing I didn't mention about the back matter, there's a bunch of toy ads for the manga Spawn toys, which look cool.
Yeah, pretty cool.
The Terry Fitzgerald's blah blah blahs are all about how well the soundtrack is selling, which is really, really funny.
Hell yeah.
It went platinum. I didn't realize that the Spawn soundtrack went platinum, which is pretty nuts. It's a lot of copies of a CD. Yeah. Also, a really funny thing that just kind of carbon dates this, if you had no idea it came out in 1997, is that they're very excited that HBO has decided to release a DVD of the HBO and of the animated series.
Whoa.
And he's like, if you're a techie like me, and
techie, it's new on Divx.
Yeah, it's just a funny thing about how far we've come. 27 years later, we're now I guess we don't make DVDs now either. Really, we make Blu-rays and things. But anyway, that's been 2 issues of Spawn.
Sure has.
Before we go, is there anything you'd like to recommend to dear listeners?
That's a good question. I was thinking about that earlier. You know what? You know what I'll recommend? I was going to get philosophical with it, but I'll change my mind entirely. I'm wearing a 2 minutes to late night t-shirt.
Oh, hell yeah.
So I'll recommend that you go on YouTube and look up 2 minutes to late night. At least watch some of their cover songs or something.
They're great. Yeah. They're super
very funny. Guarsenio Hall. Hilarious. So yeah, 2 minutes to late night. Check that out. Just a straight up plug for a thing I think is funny and cool.
I will also plug a thing I think is funny. It's also on YouTube and it's free. It is do you know Dan Licata?
I'm not sure.
Well, Dan Licata is just a comedian. He does a lot of shows around here in Brooklyn, but he goes on tour pretty frequently. He has a special called For the Boys, and it was it was recorded at his old high school for an audience solely of 15-year-old boys. And it's great. It's very stupid and very silly, and he has to get approval. There's little skits in between of him getting approval on some of his jokes, to see if he's allowed to say them.
That's from funny. Teachers. That principals. Sounds great.
Yeah, it's great. It's super funny. So I recommend you watch that. On that note, this has been Spawnography. You can please rate, review, subscribe. We are at Spawnography or at Spawnography Pod at most places. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. We tend to post mostly on Instagram, and I guess Threads by extension. So you can also send us an email at spawnographypod@gmail.com. We read them all. We'll read them on the air. If you review us, also
did we talk about Al Simmons' music taste? Did we talk about that? That guy left us that comment.
No, we didn't.
Let's get into that next episode.
Next episode,
we're right at the
we'll
end of the episode. Next episode.
I forgot about that.
We'll get into it.
We'll get into it. But yeah, George, for Todd so loved the world,
he gave his only begotten Spawn.
See you later, Hellspawn.